Welcome back to Silk Warrant. Today in this story is about the moment a waitress changed everything.
The napkin in my hand smelled like bleach and burnt coffee when he said it. "Your Honor, she's just a waitress." His name was Derek Calloway, partner at Calloway and Marsh. A $400 haircut. The kind of man who orders the most expensive thing on the menu and then complains about the portion. I kept my eyes on the folded napkin in my hands. I had been holding it for 11 minutes. I knew because I count things, I always have. What Derek Calloway didn't know, what none of them knew, was what was written in the small black notebook tucked into the pocket of my apron. I'd been waiting tables at Harmon's Steakhouse for 8 months when Derek first walked in. I remember the night clearly, late October, a Thursday. He came in with 3 other men in suits, the kind that cost more than my mother's mortgage, and he sat at table 7, which was mine. He didn't look at me when I approached. He was mid-sentence, gesturing with his hands like he was conducting an invisible orchestra, and he snapped his fingers in my direction. Twice, like I was a dog, I wrote down his order. Filet mignon, medium rare. Barolo, 2018, truffle fries, no substitutions. What I also wrote down in the small black notebook was the name on his credit card, the initials on his briefcase. The name of the woman he called twice during dinner, the same woman he told the other men at the table he'd handled. He left a 12% tip. I smiled when I cleared his table. I have always had a very controlled smile. Here's what you need to understand about the shoes. I was wearing thick-soled restaurant shoes that night. Black, non-slip. Designed for 12-hour shifts on tile floors. They were the most uncomfortable shoes I owned, and I owned them for a reason. They were the only shoes I had that didn't remind me of what I used to wear. For 9 years before Harmon's Steakhouse, I wore flat leather Oxfords to work. Dark navy, sometimes black. Government issue, practically. I left that job 18 months before Derek Calloway snapped his fingers at me. I left because my mother got sick. Stage 3, and she needed someone in her corner. I was the only one she had, so I traded Oxfords for non-slip soles. I traded my badge for an apron, and I traded my office, the one with the federal seal on the wall, for table 7 at Harmon's. Most people who looked at me saw a woman in her 40s carrying plates. Derek Calloway certainly did. He came back 4 more times in 6 weeks, and every time he requested my section. The 5th visit was different. He came alone, sat at table 7, ordered the same meal, but this time he looked at me when I set down his wine. "You're always working," he said. It wasn't a compliment. "Hard work is a habit," I said. He smiled, and I noticed it then for the first time. Whenever he felt like the smartest person in the room, he reached down and straightened his cufflinks. Left one first, then right, a small automatic gesture. Like a cat cleaning its whiskers before it pounces. He left his phone face up on the table that night, just for a moment. Habit or carelessness, with men like him, there's often no difference. I saw the name of the contact he'd called. Margaret Finch. I wrote it in my notebook. The first time I smelled that cologne, brute classic, unmistakable chemical sweet, I was 26 years old, sitting across from my supervisor at the Bureau's field office in Atlanta. He wore it every day. Agent William Crane, 18 years with the FBI. The man who taught me how to build a case so airtight that a defense attorney could spend 2 years trying to find a crack and still walk away with nothing. "Documentation is the weapon," he told me once. "Everything else is theater." I thought about Bill Crane the second time Derek Calloway walked into Harmon's, and I caught that same chemical-sweet smell around him. I remember thinking, this man has no idea what he's standing next to. I want to be precise about what Derek Calloway had done, because precision matters. Over the previous 2 years, Derek and 3 associates at Calloway and Marsh had been routing client settlement funds through a series of holding accounts before disbursement. The clients, mostly people buried in medical debt, accident victims, families already destroyed by tragedy, received less than half of what their settlements entitled to. The difference disappeared into accounts that Derek controlled. I know this because Margaret Finch came into Harmon's on a Tuesday in November. She didn't sit in my section. But I recognized the name when the hostess seated her, the same name I'd seen on Derek's phone, and I refilled her water myself. Old habit. You don't wait for introductions. You create proximity. She was crying quietly, the way people cry when they're trying not to be seen. I set down her water and asked, "Can I get you anything else?" She looked up at me and said, "Do you know a good lawyer?" The irony of that question has never left me. I told her I didn't know many lawyers I'd recommend, but I did know people. Old colleagues. People who made careers out of finding things others buried. I gave her a name written on the back of a receipt. Marcy Delgado. She left the bureau 3 years before I did and moved into forensic accounting. I didn't tell Margaret Finch who I was. I didn't explain the notebook, or the Oxfords, or the 9 years I spent learning how to document fraud in a way that survives federal court. I simply handed her the receipt, smiled, and walked back to table 7. What was inside that notebook, what had been building for 8 months, was something Derek Calloway would spend the next 4 months trying to destroy. He just didn't know it existed. December came. Derek brought clients into Harmon's twice in 1 week. Celebrating, I understood later. He had just closed an $11 million medical malpractice settlement for a family in Macon, Georgia. The father died during a routine procedure. The wife and 3 children were entitled to the full amount. They received $4.2 million. The paperwork was pristine. To an ordinary eye, the routing looked like standard fees and administrative costs. To an ordinary eye, Marcy Delgado did not have ordinary eyes. She called me on a Sunday morning in January. I was still wearing my work shoes. I had pulled a double shift. "We have enough," she said. "How much is enough?" I asked. "More than enough," she said. "The question is whether you want to be involved when this goes to the authorities." I told her I'd think about it. I already knew the answer. I thought about the notebook. 8 months of entries. Not accusations, not dramatic claims, just observations, names, dates, amounts overheard, phone contacts glimpsed, the language Derek used with certain clients versus others. The careful phrases he used when he knew someone wouldn't fight back. The pattern of which settlements he rushed and which ones he delayed. Pattern recognition is something they teach formally at the bureau. But honestly, I'd been doing it my whole life. My mother called it nosiness. My supervisor at the academy called it a gift. I called Marcy back 40 minutes later. "I'm involved," I said. "The civil case was filed in March. Derek Calloway found out 2 days before the filing date. I don't know how." Men like him always have networks. People who whisper things into their ears before the world starts moving. He came into Harmon's the night before the filing. He sat at table 7. He ordered the Barolo, and he straightened his cufflinks. He was performing calm. I recognized it because I do the same thing, but his hands were tight on the menu. And when I brought his wine, he looked at me for a long moment before speaking. "You've been working here a while," he said. "About 8 months," I answered. "Quiet job," he said. "Easier than some." "Depends on the customers," I said. He left a 20% tip that night. The first proper tip he had ever given me. I think some part of him knew. The predatory instinct that had served him for years was probably warning him that something was wrong. He just didn't know what to listen to. The hearing was in April. I was subpoenaed as a witness. I arrived wearing my navy Oxfords, the same flat leather shoes I hadn't worn in nearly 2 years. They fit exactly the same. Derek was already seated when I walked into the courtroom. He didn't recognize me out of context. That happens more often than people think. Strip someone of their uniform and they become invisible. I had been invisible to him for 8 months. His attorney questioned the credibility of the documentation. He argued there were chain of custody concerns involving evidence gathered by a civilian witness. Derek leaned toward his attorney and said it quietly, but the courtroom was small. The acoustics carried everything. "She's just a waitress." He was straightening his left cufflink when he said it. Judge Patricia Wren looked up from her documents. Then she looked at me. "Ms. Cole," she said, Would you like to clarify your professional background for the record? I stood, straight posture, hands at my sides, feet shoulder-width apart. The kind of posture that never really leaves you after federal training. Special Agent Rachel Cole, I said. Retired, 9 years with the FBI Financial Crimes Division. My specialty was forensic document analysis and the reconstruction of fraudulent disbursement structures. The room went silent. Derek Calloway's left hand froze against his cuff. I'm also a licensed forensic accounting consultant, I continued. I was retained by Marcy Delgado's firm to assist with this investigation. I looked at Derek then, not with anger. I don't waste anger in professional settings. I looked at him the same way I used to look at filing cabinets in my old office, like he was something already opened. The notebooks entered into evidence, Judge Wren said, were compiled by you. Yes, Your Honor, beginning 8 months ago, she nodded slowly. Continue, she said. Here's what Marcy's forensic report revealed. 46 clients over 32 months. Total settlement value, $63 million. Amount received by clients, $28 million. The remaining $35 million moved through 4 holding accounts, 2 shell companies registered in Delaware, and a consulting firm connected to Derek Calloway's college roommate. The clients were people who had already survived devastating losses. They trusted a man in a good suit who promised to fight for them, and he did fight. He won. Then he handed them scraps and told them to be grateful. The notebooks established the behavioral pattern. Marcy's forensic work established the money trail. Margaret Finch's testimony established the human cost. Derek Calloway's attorney argued for nearly 3 hours. He used words like coincidence, mischaracterization, and overreach. Derek sat beside him straightening his cufflinks over and over again. I counted 22 times. Some habits don't know when to stop. Judge Wren delivered her ruling from the bench. She spoke slowly, carefully, like every word had been selected long before she entered the courtroom. She spoke about fiduciary duty, about officers of the court, about vulnerable clients who trusted Derek Calloway during the worst moments of their lives and walked away with less than they deserved. When the ruling became official, summary judgment for the plaintiffs, referral to the state bar, and referral to the U.S. Attorney's Office, Derek sat perfectly still. For the first time since I'd met him, he didn't touch his cufflinks. His hands rested flat against the table like he had forgotten what they were for. I gathered my documents, placed them into my bag, and walked past Derek Calloway on my way out. He said nothing. I said nothing. But as I passed him, I noticed something. His left cufflink had come loose, just slightly. The silver clasp hung open a fraction, a tiny imperfection, the kind of thing a man like Derek would normally fix without thinking. He never touched it. He just stared at the table. I walked out into the April sunlight. The air smelled like cut grass, car exhaust, and something faintly floral. The exact same smell from the morning I walked into Harmon's Steakhouse for my first shift and thought, this is going to take a while. Some things worth doing always do. I still have the notebook, not because I need it. The case is closed. The evidence is filed correctly. Copies are secured. I keep it because it reminds me of something I've always known. Documentation is the weapon. Everything else is theater. Derek Calloway spent 8 months looking at me and seeing a woman carrying plates. He was right about that part. I was carrying something. He was wrong about everything else. The question is this. When the room finally goes quiet, and it's your turn to speak, will what you built in silence be worth what it cost you to protect it?